This is a great work of art that's got very powerful memories and associations. It's something that the city should be absolutely proud of and devoted to as part of its heritage.
Yeah, I think it probably is his best work. And I say that because of that beautiful figure of peace.
It was quite a different place from what we're used to now. There were no cars. There was very little in the way of electricity. If you got your milk, you'd be reliant on horse and cart to do that. It was progressive. Women's suffrage. There was a form of Christchurch radicalism associated with what became the Labour movement. So there was a real radical strand there as well as a more conservative strand within Christchurch.
There was a great buoyancy to New Zealand generally, and Canterbury in particular, in the first decade of the 20th century. You just need to look at the public buildings that were put up at that time, and you realise that the success, particularly of the frozen meat trade, and then increasingly also of dairying, but particularly the frozen meat trade, had funneled through into a huge amount of public investment. Before the First World War, there was a whole host of civic memorials that were put up to pioneers, to royalty, great number to those who'd served in the South African War, which spoke of a country that had surplus capital to spend and wanted to show off its successes and its pride in its own history. There'd been quite a lot of interest in military preparation in New Zealand in the years leading up to the First World War, and so understandably, when the First World War broke out on August the 4th, 1914, there was a degree of enthusiasm which might shock us if it were to happen again today.
It was the biggest thing that had happened to New Zealanders. If you sort of think we were only, not even 100 years into settlement. They had come from overseas from 1840 on. So here we are, the First World War, and we're only 60 odd years into settling this country, and suddenly we're called back to Britain to fight.
I suspect that a lot thought it would be a great adventure, which I think it was initially. If you're young, you're 18, 19, you're younger than that and you lie about your age in order to get there, it's an exciting adventure. So there's a great rush of people to sign up, but then it becomes some other kind of reality.
When the death lists began to appear in the newspapers, but also when wounded soldiers came back, got off the trains, and people realised what war was really about. By 1916 and 1917 particularly, the burdens of war were very considerable, and the volunteering started to drop off, and so they had to bring in conscription. Yeah, the First World War had the effect of creating a much greater degree of social division and also a greater degree of doubts and insecurities.
Well, the casualty rate for those who went to war was huge, just in terms of those who died, but also those who were wounded or had other issues because of that they had been at war. So we lost a high proportion of those who went away. The late Michael King, one of our greatest historians, put it best in his Penguin History of New Zealand, where he says people didn't need to be told the angel of death had gone overhead because they'd heard the beating of its wings. And I think that gives you a real sense of how profound this was, this loss of life.
Unlike the tradition in the United States, when New Zealand soldiers died overseas, they were buried overseas. They weren't brought home. And as a result, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers had nowhere they could go and visit and express their sense of loss. There wasn't a gravestone. And so in a sense, one of the reasons for war memorials was to provide a kind of surrogate grave.
And you see that everywhere you go around Canterbury. I mean, even today, if I'm to drive around, and it's the same in other parts of the country, you see war memorials, memorial gates, Where I grew up, there was a memorial hall with all the names on. There are memorials of varying sizes and shapes right throughout the province. And what strikes me is not the fact that they're there, but how many young men, their names appear there.
There are thousands and thousands of young men whose mortal remains have never been returned to New Zealand. So the country was in many ways, I guess, in a period of mourning.
After the First World War and soldiers started returning, they wanted something to acknowledge and remember those that never came back with them. And three proposals were put up. One was the bridge behind us, one was the Citizens' War Memorial, which we're talking about, and the other one was a museum of memories, which fell by the wayside.
Three proposals made the final cut, of which George Gould's pillar was one of them. But it was cast aside in favour of the Bridge of Remembrance, and the Bridge of Remembrance was going to cover all the Canterbury regiments. And so that went ahead, but Gould felt there needed to be something in the square, something that aligned to the cathedral, and remembering that Gould had lost his son in the war. So it was a deep tragedy for him.
The idea of a Citizens' War Memorial got resistance from the RSA. See, look, why would we spend this money on a memorial? We've already got the Bridge of Remembrance. Why would we spend more when this could be spent on vets who've come back, who need help? And in the end, it was an Anglican elite that was essentially led that committee.
Christchurch particularly had always had quite a strong sectarian feeling in it, partly because it had prided itself on being an Anglican settlement, but it also had attracted quite a lot of Irish Catholic migrants. Sectarianism really did cut across the society, and that came into play when it came to the memorialising the First World War, because it was the Anglican elite that focused around the memorial in the square, and the others were left with the Bridge of Remembrance.
It's linked in a way to the cathedral in the end, and it only got there because the cathedral chapter allowed it in the back door.
Trethewey was born in 1892. His father was a woodworker. Trethewey had actually trained under Guernsey at the Canterbury School of Art to be a carver, and when he moved to Wellington with his wife, he decided he wasn't going to be a woodworker or a wood carver, and he's largely self-taught, and he decided that he would study anatomy and work on anatomically correct, beautiful sculptures and become a monumental mason. Initially, Gould had looked at memorials in England to get some idea of the type of memorial, and he was looking at English sculptors. But Trethewey actually did a very quick sketch which he gave to George Hart, and they put it into a better form, and that was accepted. George Hart was a noted architect. I guess his most well-known work was the Millers Building, so he was very au fait with that modernist principle. And Trethewey's monument and the style of his figures, although in my opinion they're incredibly classical, by the time they're on George Hart's design for the actual monument itself, they do fit in with that 1930s period. They're not totally Art Deco, but they sit within that more angular form.
Trethewey, he was a great sculptor. One of the main differences between this work and a lot of other war memorial stuff that was going down at the same time was that when you have a look at some of the others, they're quite generic. They're quite Michelangelesque. This one's different because they're portraits. It's a portrait of his wife. It's a portrait of his daughters. They're people, and they're clothed in contemporary fashion. The technique is very what we sort of loosely describe as Art Deco now. You look at the way the figures are, and just the technique that he's used is very dated. We can easily date it to, oh, that's the fashion, the art fashion of the time. So it wasn't the statue fashion, it was what was going down in the arts. So it's actually like more of an artwork than a bronze figure of whoever.
Of course, they were modelled in clay.
On a metal armature, and then he would have plaster Paris. In his garage, at his home, in Linwood, making these huge figures, and then making the moulds, then packaging them up, and actually accompanying them to the UK to get cast.
The casting of bronze to that level wasn't, quite as perhaps refined or able to be done here. It was something that they were doing all the time in the UK.
Citizens' War Memorial, regardless, was unveiled in June 1937, and what's evolved largely since then is the bridge behind us has become the focal point for Armistice Day in November, whereas since 1937, or 1938 would be the first one, the Citizens' War Memorial has become the focus for Anzac Day.
The last time I saw it was about 6 months after the earthquakes, and it was surrounded by barbed wire, and the crumbled cathedral was behind it, and there was grass growing all over the steps of the memorial, and I wept. I thought, this is just terrible.
This is an historic occasion. It's a citizens' war memorial for a reason. It was the citizens of Christchurch wanted a memorial of a particular kind, a particular nature, and they wanted it in Cathedral Square. There was a lot of toing and froing about the City Council back in the day not wanting this memorial in the square, and so the Anglican Church provided the location for the Citizens' War Memorial to be built. Over the years, it was felt that the memorial belonged to the people of Christchurch, but not in a way that really reflected the legal arrangements that sat until such time as we come to the decision about what to do in relation to the War Memorial and its proximity to a cathedral that is so badly damaged by the earthquake. And so this part of the journey of the War Memorial brings it from the Anglican land to the public realm of Cathedral Square.
When I first sort of stood there, essentially the Citizens' War Memorial was in the way of the cathedral restoration project, as well as being right on the same site as where it was mooted that the new visitors centre was to go. But in order to get the structure in to support the cathedral while the restoration work was being undertaken, the memorial had to go because it was essentially in the wrong place and it might be damaged, so it had to be moved.
It's a Category 1 structure, which means that the restoration team has to look at all manner of different options for doing the repair work. The memorial shaft was cracked in many locations, the stone surface was cracked in many locations, and in some locations the stone surface had been dislodged by up to 10 millimetres. Its original steel frame was badly rusted, and that was causing the cracking and the displacement. And over the lifetime of the structure there's been significant repairs in response to that cracking. So with us shifting the memorial, we took the opportunity to actually deconstruct it stone by stone, and then reconstruct it stone by stone, correcting the problems that were there before and setting it up for new construction for another 100 years or 200 years.
Yeah, all the figures are great, and just to, as a whole, how they stand or sit or how they've been placed It's kind of no part you could take away and nothing you could add. It's kind of quite complete in itself. So I've been very careful to make sure that that is what is rebuilt, restored and rebuilt, so that it will look exactly like that. So even though some of the stone, quite a worn surface from weathering, or, you know, the verdigris from the bronze runoff, if you like, over the stone, I'm very wary of making sure that that is maintained. And that's because we don't want something that looks pristine and new. It is the Citizens' War Memorial in its age right now, but with a new interior that it's going to send it into the future.
The prime problem that we had here was the steel frame that had been installed out of plumb. There was no effective cover on the steelwork behind the stone near the top of it, and the water got in and it rusted.
We could tell that because of the stones that had already been replaced, and when I cut some of those off and we had a look in, oh my God, you could see where they'd actually painted that anti-rust paint over the concrete and over these bits. It's all knobbly, but it's actually flat steel. That's how rusty it was. And you can't have that in a public space now. We took the bronzes off first, so very delicately cut the supporting pins that were through the backs of them. So we just did that manually, like hacksaw blade essentially. And we just cut those, and we cut underneath the feet, cut the pins off, and then as these figures were supported in frames that were specially made, that Grant Wilkinson designed to hold the figures. So we stropped the figures to the supporting frames first, then released them while the tension was being put on them by the crane that was going to take them off and put them on a truck and take them to safety. The top bronze figure was loose after the earthquake. And of course then she was strapped on. Very, very little damage. One of the bronzes had been pulled backwards and forwards on its pin, and there was metal fatigue in that area, but we didn't use that particular method of pinning it back anyway because we were using the hangers. The whole memorial was reinforced concrete. The reinforcing, where they'd use steel, which is okay, but after earthquakes, and we've had several in Christchurch, and you know, some dry joints in the concrete, where the concrete's been poured at different times, allowed to set, then moisture can track in, and of course the steel interior rusts and expands and then blows the concrete. So we had to cut all of that out. So all of the stone on the exterior of the cross had to be cut off. With a diamond tip chainsaw, yeah, we cut the cross off the top. That was in one piece. And then each course of stone we dismantled as in one course, taking each individual stone out, numbering them all. I cut down the perps and cut the bedding joints so that I wasn't cutting into the stone. Yeah, took them back to Pages Road where they were put in storage, and some of them which were damaged or the surface was too far damaged. We got a delivery of Portland stone from the UK and proceeded to replace the very damaged stones.
We didn't expect to find anything, and of course we did find something. When they pulled this piece of concrete down, this little thing, and it is only little, fell down, attached still to the concrete, and did not smash. The little container itself turned immediately to a milky colour, lost its clarity, but there is something inside it. It would appear that the stopper was glass, and the stopper unfortunately is broken, but I think it's going straight back to the conservatory, and we will see if we can remove that stopper and see what is inside. So it's a wee bit of watch this space.
It looks like it's got an edge.
We could see that there was literally a message in the bottle.
Yeah, if I have a look.
Like that's not going to come up and out, is it?
No, I don't think it's going to come up and out. We're going to have to let it dry out.
We couldn't see what it was. So recently we have been able to remove this, and the message has gone to a conservator who has unrolled it, and it simply has the names of those men who worked on it in February 1937. And I think it might have just been a last-minute decision on their behalf, and they had wrapped this bottle in newspaper of the day and set it in the concrete. At the top of it is Trethewey himself.
The most interesting thing inside the cavity was a note, and it said, during the reign of George, and then a list of the stonemasons that worked on it at that time. And so, away from that, but in the same cavity, I added the names of the stonemasons who worked on the memorial and its reconstruction in its new place, including a rest in peace for Nathan, who died during the process. Just a really, really good mason, and very patient with the younger masons and the apprentices. We all had just to stop and a check, just to make sure we weren't, stressing out.
The new construction involved putting the stone back over a galvanised reinforcing steel cage filled with concrete, and then each stone is actually attached to that concrete frame using stainless steel pins.
Yeah, the cross went on first.
I reckon it'll be pretty good.
And then the bronzes clicked on. We hung the bronzes in a different way. The Grant designed these hangers, so the bronze just comes down and hangs.
Oh, you beauty.
Basically, they're just hanging there, but they're pinned. You can't just like unhook them, take them out. You still have to cut pins. So they're pinned at the base. And we use, a stainless steel threaded rod to do that, and stainless steel fixings to do that. As everything else inside, it's stainless steel pins. Sort of bringing them down onto hangers, because they're all sort of hollow at the back. There were sort of, cavities at the back. So we're able to sort of make wee notches so that they located perfectly onto the stainless steel hangers, and pinned down into structural adhesive. The trickiest one was the wings of the top figure. You can imagine these bronzes were hanging from the crane, and chain and then strop is the way that you've got to do this. So we've got to make sure that the chain is well enough away from the transept of the cross, so as not to scratch it or to scratch any of the other stonework. So we've got to deliver these things which are millimetre close to the stone without touching the stone, because as soon as you touch a stone you put a scar on it and there's no hiding it. But we didn't have to, we were very delicate.
It's set for another couple of 100 years because the work has been done to modern standards.
We knew right from the start that it had to be better than it was built originally, because it was bespoke. You had a whole lot of masons there building this thing for the first time, and we were restoring it and conserving it. So we had to be very accurate with where we were putting things, and the bending joints were perfect, the perps were all perfect. So it's actually, as far as stonemasonry goes, I think it's a sharper memorial now than it ever was.
The rededication of the Citizen War Memorial in the presence of Her Royal Highness today will once again provide a place where all of us may come, remember and reflect on the sacrifices made by the men and women of New Zealand in service to their country.
It's wonderful to me to see it restored and actually brought forward away from the cathedral, which I think gives it a much better presence. It makes it far less overawed by the cathedral, much less an extension of the Anglican community and much more part of the Christ Church community.
I thought it was moved into a way better place because it was moved sort of off consecrated land into the public arena, and it's a citizens' war memorial. It's for the citizens. So it was just a win-win, and I think where it is now is way better.
We have come home to Cathedral Square and to this magnificent monument, the Citizens' War Memorial.